So previously on Everybody in the Pool, specifically on the Method Mike A section, I took a look and reviewed Unlimited Love, the newest Red Hot Chili Peppers album in April of this past year. And what's interesting since that time, usually when the Chili Peppers record an album, they do a massive amount of songwriting and recording. They basically record material for two or three albums. And so, unlike previous times where they saved the B sides and released it later on at various points, this time the band actually decided, hey, you know something? Why not? We're going to release another full album of material that we recorded. And this is where we are now. And Return of the Dream Canteen is that second album and from the same sessions. And it's coming out on October 14th by the time you hear this. And so I've talked about the Chili Peppers before and my history with them. And why not? If we're going to do the first of the albums, let's do the second of the albums as well. So that's where we were. There were 50 songs recorded during the entire sessions that they did for this album, I believe during the pandemic. I was not a huge fan of Unlimited Love, which was the April release. Just not a return to form, production issues. I talked a lot about it. Feel free to reference that review. But like all Chili Peppers albums, it had some interesting stuff. So the question is now, will this next batch of tracks be better than the previous, being from the same session? Is this a return to form or is this more of the same? So we started out, the first track on this album is Tip of My Tongue, which was also the first single. I like this song. This had freaky styly kind of vibes. It was a solid funk in the newer Chili Pepper scent. There was a little over reliance on the pretty chorus, which is very common of the newer Chili Peppers material, but I think it was just a great funk tune and a great vocal performance. Rhythmically, Anthony Kiedis was doing all kinds of interesting things. 111, there's a little segue solo that is cool, and that's what the Chili Peppers used to do a lot of back in the day. And the more they incorporate that, the more interesting, less formulaic their songs are, and that's cool. So overall, a good start to it. The second track is next up is Peace and Love. This continues being a very solid mid-tempo funk number. It's led by Flea in that newer Chili Pepper style. He's playing octaves and funky octaves, but there's space in his production and nuance or his playing, and therefore some nuances in there. And it made the song a little more interesting and put a little more protein in there. There is some interesting guitar effects going on at the bridge about 227 into it that make it unique and interesting and change it up. This song once again relies on too pretty of a chorus, which is a theme of newer Chili Peppers albums, but more good than bad. The next track, number three, is called Reach Out. This is the Chili Peppers returning to that medieval kind of chord progression or sound. This is first highlighted on the song Eskimo, which is a B side, I believe, from the greatest hit sessions in 2003 that they did. This was a less explosive, almost like a diet version of it. The heaviness really didn't do anything for me. Chad Smith sounded great. He sounds always sounds great, but he sounded especially great on this album. So shout out to him for some great drumming. But overall, not a very memorable track. The fourth track is the second single called Eddie, which is a tribute to Eddie Van Halen. Really cool. Great, very interesting lyrics and listening along about all the references about my brother's a keeper, my wife is a TV, or I married a TV wife. I'm kind of curious what Alex and Wolfgang and all of the Van Halen tribe would think about this track. So I totally changed my opinion on this song when it first came out, since it has that mellow, sunny kind of newer Chili Peppers vibes to it. I almost dismissed it as been there, done that. But if you actually take a step back and listen to the song, it's structurally and the arrangement is great. It's just a great overall track. Nothing bad to say about it. It's just that sometimes that style, when you hear songs too often from the same style from a band, they kind of blend together and kind of loses its specialness. And I think just of like a Black Summer or Not the One, it that's what ultimately why when I first heard it, I wasn't really interested. But taking a step back and hearing it in the album, it's a great song and it's definitely a double thumbs up. Great solo, also great kind of tapping solo by Frusciante, not going full Van Halen, but going partial Van Halen, which was kind of a nice tribute. The fifth track is Fake as Funk. So This is interesting where the intro or the main part that leads up to the explosiveness, this is like the ascending Chili Peppers chord progression that they've used a lot in more recent years. And really wasn't a fan. They've used mathematically this chord progression a couple of times before. That part wasn't interesting. When it got to the funky part and the heavy part, that's where the song really picked up and became a winner. Where, because it was funky, there were horns on it, which is always great. Flea playing trumpet is always cool. And Chad Smith just bashing away at the drums. The only issue I really had with this is that the intro to the guitar intro to the funky part, if you listen to it, it almost sounds like those late 2000s LG stock ringtones that they used to have, where it's like, come on, you're John Frusciante, you could do better than this. The sixth track is called Bella. This almost has like an Enjoy Incubus funk feel to it, the first Incubus EP that, or actually technically second, first major label EP that they put out. And it has a standard newer era Chili Peppers pretty chorus, but that actually goes well, as does the pre chorus with the harder, funkier edge to it. And the timing is really interesting too. While it is 4/4, I believe, it's a little bit off, and the syncopation makes it really unique and interesting. Great horns on it, and they really made the most of this pretty chorus. And there's also like a little bit of a scatting part to it, like a bridge at 346 ish, which is cool and different, and adds more color to the track. The seventh track is Roulette. And so this is like a standard pop chord progression. What is cool about this is Flea approaches it with a repetitive bass line, but it's causing dissonance and making the song sound a little bit more interesting. And I like when he does that. The chorus is very, very weak. It's basically the song Bastards of Light, which was on Unlimited Love. It's very, very, very similar. And that's a case maybe of writing too many songs in too short a time in the same sessions. But it's just too pretty. And if they would have relied more on that dissonance and to the main riff, they could have done more with it. I do like the outro that just Flea and Chad do. It's nice. It could have been expanded, maybe almost with like a Flea solo, something like Naked in the Rain or One Way Traffic, which they did on Unlimited Love. The eighth track is the very experimental My Cigarette. And see, this is what I talk about when, if you're a band, if you're a successful band or artist or whomever, there's two things that could happen. You could put out similar sounding material, which your fan base is used to, and just more of the same. Or you could try something really experimental and out there. And it may either work, you may alienate your fan base, or you may fall flat in your face. But you gotta A for effort, C for execution. And I think that's what happened with this one is the latter. It's A for effort, but C for execution overall. It's the vocal performance just didn't really work. It was too much repeating the My Cigarette and kind of staccatoing it line. The synth drum machines were cool. It sounded like the drum machines, especially almost like Nine Inch Nails, earlier Nine Inch Nails, like Pretty Hate Machine, or even a little bit like the Chili Peppers did on Getaway with Danger Mouse. There's saxophone on it too, which is always interesting and unique to Chili Peppers albums. We're very used to trumpet from Flea and at times cameos from other people, but it was cool when they had a full horn section, whether Angelo from Fishbone or Tree, one of their good friends. Rick Rubin as producer was kind of a hindrance to this track. I would have approached this very much like the band Japan, Tin Drum era, which is the last Japan album from the early 80s, I believe 1981. And just more creepy, more haunting, more emphasis on the sax, less emphasis on the vocal repetition. I think this could have been a really, really cool track. And also, hey, Flea playing fretless bass would be fun. Shout out to Mick Karn, the great Mick Karn from Japan. Number nine is Afterlife, best track on the album. This is hands down. This is pure fire. This is great. There's like a weird spoken word intro very quickly, but very cool, very groovy, very funky. I love the harmonics that Frusciante is doing at the very beginning as opposed to playing full notes. It does have a pretty chorus, as most newer Chili Peppers songs do, but that wasn't a hindrance. It was fine. And the bridge has some really interesting R&B type chords that would make a Quincy Jones or just anybody, Teddy Pendergrass, any of those like classic Motown 70s R&B records. It would make them proud. And Then I just love the solo and the outro about 307 into it. Flea just explodes on a bass playing these awesome chords over a great Frusciante solo and outro. So this gets a double thumbs up. Well done. Keeper workout music. Awesome. Playlist for life. This is great. The 10th track is Shoot Me a Smile. Kind of a cheesy song title. When I heard it, especially with what's later on the album, it has a very similar chord progression to The Longest Wave from The Getaway. And there's just some interesting synths on it, but overall, this is kind of a boring track. Didn't do anything for me. Handful is the 11th track. And I like the initial approach. It almost sounds like they're going to go reggae, and I was kind of hoping for that. Like, I know Flea's talked about not really being emotionally moved by the police before, and but I was hoping they went full police in this. Or also, there's a B-side the Chili Peppers did called Joe from Stadium Arcadium. I believe it's about Joe Strummer, but it's a full reggae track, and I was hoping that they go that route, but they didn't, and it just was a little too poppy, and the chorus was just too silly. It was like a drinking song or something like that. I will say though, one cool thing that Anthony Kiedis did put in lyrically is there's a chapter in my book that I don't want you to read. There's a chapter in my life when I failed to succeed. I do like that verse because it's almost referencing some things in his book that ultimately he got some backlash for and he wasn't really proud about or were kind of controversial at the time. So that's kind of cool just to acknowledge it if he was going that route. There's some nice trumpets on here, and I do like Chad Smith going double time. So there are some decent elements of production. You have to give Ruben and Ryan Hewitt and whomever credit there, but they could have gone full reggae and really added a lot of diversity and color to this album, or even like more Caribbean style, like just something like if you listen to that track "Shea Butter Baby" by Ari Lennox, the guitar line in that is more explosive than anything here, and it would have been cool to go with a riff like that, something that's really really memorable. Number 12 is the drummer. This was rumored to be about Taylor Hawkins, given the Chili Peppers' friendship with him and the Foo Fighters. But as this was recorded during the pandemic, 2020, before Taylor Hawkins passed away earlier this year, this was not a redo, or it was they didn't go back and do this song last minute. So I think generally what he's talking about the drummer is how just there's nonsense going on in the club and some existential lyrics about just not following the patterns of life and just as the drummer's just kind of doing his thing. So it wasn't specifically about Taylor Hawkins, at least my understanding. This is very similar stylistically to the track on Mercury from By the Way. So I don't really know how I felt. I think this is also kind of like RHEP does Nina, 90, like the 99 Red Balloons track. It has kind of reminds me of that. It's a good tempo. They really relied on the chorus too much. Really just should have one or two less choruses, just unnecessary. And the bridge just seems like they kind of pulled it out of their behind. It just wasn't really exciting. It's just this was like a stock bridge that they've done. I do think this is a good workout track. I think it's is it a good track overall? It's okay. Would I keep it on if I hear it in the car? Yes. Will I go to listen to it in my free time? Probably not. 13 is Bag of Grins. I know when the album tracks first came out, seeing Shoot Me a Smile and Bag of Grins, it was a little bit like, this is kind of corny, guys. RTP get very, very scary. It's almost like Gargamel music or like Halloween music, as it is almost Halloween time. So once again, the issue of this track, it's not bad, but would I go listen to it in my spare time? Am I going to go and be like, hey, I want to listen to Bag of Grins? And the answer is no. So on that note, it's kind of just a pass by. Next up is La 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 or La La La's. I forget how many laws there are. Let's actually look right now. Eight. There's eight laws. So La to the eighth power, La to exponentially eight. The Red Hot Chili Peppers go full A24 indie soundtrack on this one. This is another experimental track, keyboards on it, another saxophone solo. They did that a couple of times, which is awesome. And a lot of stylistically, it reminds me of If or Hard to Concentrate from Stadium Arcadium. I would have gone a little bit more Japan tin drum era again, just more haunting synths and maybe fretless bass and sax as they used in their later era. And the chorus was a little too overused in it. But overall, I give it a thumbs up. I will say though that because it's very experimental and very different, and just not as formulaic. If you don't like the track If, or if you don't like Hard to Concentrate, you're probably not going to like this song and probably say you're crazy for liking it. But I appreciate the experimenting. Lyrically, it's standard. I want to find somebody and live a great life with them. I do wonder if the la la la's are just kind of sarcastic, or maybe it's just some kind of commentary on how tough it is to find somebody and live with them in modern society. You'd have to ask Anthony Kiedis about that one. Next up is Copper Belly. This is the return to the medieval RHCP, the Charlemagnean Chili Peppers RHCP progression. There's even a line about a kingdom in here. So they knew what they were getting into with this medieval chord progression. This actually is the opposite, where a lot of newer Chili Peppers tracks, they have these really, really solid riffs, groovy, funky riffs, and very pretty choruses that are just kind of a little bit too sugary. This is the opposite, where the riff was kind of all right. They've done the Charlemagne medieval thing many times before, and it's not that exciting. But the chorus was cool because it was a little bit dissonant. Think like, especially in Michigan, from Stadium Arcadium, or the band Sugar, that was Bob Mould's post Husker Du band that he had in the 90s. There's a very dissonant kind of chorus to it. Chad Smith again did a great job. Flea does an awesome bass riff at 227. It's not really a solo, but just kind of like a lick or a riff, and then they explode after that. And to me, that's what makes the song work. More, it's almost like a tug of war, where is it going to work or is it not going to work? The main riff is okay, but that part, the chorus and that explosive little lick make it work, and I give it a thumbs up. Carry Me Home, the 16th track. This is just Chili Peppers go full Hendrix. This is just like, I don't want to say shameless, but this is, you'll listen to it. It's full Hendrix, Hey Joe, Castles Made of Sand, Manic Depression. It has all of that in there. This could have basically been like a Hendrix riff or a Government Mule riff. The verse is very standard RHCP. I would have actually liked if they went a little more like Hendrixy or Government Muley, or Government Muley as they call it. And it's pretty good. I would have liked to see the guitar sound a little bit more like Mother's Milk, because they were playing Castles Made of Sand and Fire around that era. Fire, of course, was recorded with the original lineup of Hilo Slovak and Jack Irons. And so, but I know John Frusciante had issues with that album and Michael Beinhorn. It's a shame because he sounded great on Mother's Milk, one of was my favorite albums of all time. Yeah, it's good. Nothing really bad to say about it. It almost sounds a little bit too tributey or covery, but it's good. In the Snow is the last official track. So this has really made me laugh. The drum machines sound like something out of Midnight Love by Marvin Gaye. And hey, guess what? I've been, I don't say complaining, but I've been talking about Flea going fretless bass. He doesn't often go fretless bass, but just because if you're going to have tracks that have elements of Japan from Tin Drum era, or even Gentlemen Take Polaroids or Quiet Life, like later era Japan, then you're going to have to go a fretless bass like Mick Karn played with them. And what do you know? Flea goes fretless bass here, and it sounds great. And it's cool. I have to admit, like, one thing I do, if I ever do meet Flea, and that's the first question I want to ask him is, are you a fan of Japan and Mick Karn? I don't see how they wouldn't be, especially if you're listening to Magazine and all the bands of that post-punk, the Killing Jokes and the Magazines and the bands of that era from England. I know the Chili Peppers are big fans of all that stuff, along with like the No Wave New York stuff with James Chance and the Contortions and Lydia Lunch and all that cool stuff. The riff is like very indie, like indie rock. I almost want to say Sigur Rós, but not totally. And the chorus is almost the second time they don't have a pretty chorus. I like it because it's contrast. And if you always have a pretty sugary chorus, it's going to make your music and your arrangements very formulaic. And the chorus not being pretty here is cool. The spoken word here is cool as well. Does it totally work? No, but it's different enough where it adds some flavor and adds some protein to this album. The more I listen to it, the more I think this reminds me of, like, I could see this as like a True Stories Talking Heads era track, which of course Tim and I, Mummies and I, reviewed a couple of years back. I actually think about a little over 2 years ago. Spoken word also goes back, of course, to Death of a Martian, the last track on Stadium Arcadium. So a little bit of reference there, or shout out there. And then The Shape I'm Taking is a bonus track, which I don't think is going to be available proper in North America. I believe it's only in a Japanese release. But hey, you can find it on YouTube. I'm sure it'll be on YouTube within by the hour, or by the time this people are listening to this. This is this is kind of funny. It sounds like a Getaway track. It could have been they could have done this with Josh Klinghoffer on a Getaway. Drums stand out. It's a great drum line. It reminds me of early XTC with a lot of like polyrhythms and African drumming. And I actually think this is a better end to the album than In the Snow because it's more positive. It's just a little more uplifting. In the Snow, kind of, it's not really a downer, but it's very kind of a little ambiguous the way it ends. Where this is more positive and more uplifting. More like, yeah, cool. Overall, goes to the experience. What are my initial thoughts? Well, I think it's much better than Unlimited Love. It's more experimental. It's in the right direction, and just more interesting overall. The songs are better. The song choices are better. I still think they need to get away from the over reliance of the pretty sugary choruses and just get away from some of the chord ideas or some of the references that they have used over the last this newer era by the way forward and to present day. And it's ironic because there was an interview recently, I think a day or two ago. Well, by the time you hear this, a couple of days, Josh Klinghoffer said it was very stifling being his 10 years in the Chili Peppers. They had a style and they stayed with it, and it was tough to write songs out of that style. I don't totally agree with him, and because there's some tracks on the Getaway which were very experimental and cool and different. But I kind of do get what he says. Like thematically, there's kind of a just solid foundation that the Chili Peppers have, and sometimes they do dip a little bit too much into that well. Ultimately, it would be good if they could work with a different producer. I don't mean to bag on Rick Rubin. As I said, I love his historic work. I love what he's done. Like his 80s, 90s, and even up until 2005 stuff is great. But not being a musician, you have limitations and relying too much on songwriting. I think a lot of the appeal of the Chili Peppers is they are very musically gifted. And they're great riff writers, and when you try to become songwriters and craft a pop song, or nowadays it's like a Spotify or algorithm song, it kind of takes away from your overall bag of tricks. Overall, yeah, it just it's in the right direction. It's I like the playing on this album. I think what's most important is the playing on this album is better, just more overall more interesting than Unlimited Love. With that, out of a 10, I'm going to give this album. Originally, I was going to give it a very, very hard 6. However, having listened to this album about a bunch of times through over the last couple of days, I'm going to push this up to a 6.5. It's not me being generous. Maybe some people think it is. I just think it's them, the Chili Peppers, going in the right direction, a return to form. I would really, really like them to keep moving towards what they're doing on this album, just expand it even more wild and crazy. So that's overall my review of the album. Tell me what you think. Listen to it. Write in the comments if you think I am full of bologna, salami, prosciutto, and all of the above, or if you agree with what I have to say, or if you think just it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Cool either way. Or if you don't like it too, hey, it's cool. This has been a very, very strange, almost disruptive year. It's just there's been a lot going on in my life, Tim's life, and we're quite busy dudes. We still talk about doing an episode all the time live. We still have one episode in the bag that we're editing from a while ago. It's going to be a very special episode, so it's taking a lot of time to edit, even finding time to edit. I would like to do another review or two of albums that are coming out later this year. There's some interesting stuff coming out end of this month, early next month that I'd love to review if time permits. And I will 100% guarantee do a top 10 of 2022 along with another collage of all my adventures. I hope you enjoy this. Tell me what you think. Like, subscribe, share. Thank you for listening and enjoy the new Chili Peppers album, Method Mike A. Red Hot Chili Peppers, Return to the Dream Canteen. We out.